Slaptail squad, assemble.
The devil said, sit and have yourself a glass. He said, I know you're angry right now, but the feeling will pass. So keep your cup tipped up when you're feeling down low. And when you finally forget your purpose, you'll be stumbling on down the side of the road. Oh, you know it ain't good for you to keep going on like you do. Time's running away, it's running fast. Whoa, 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 said I know. I used to walk down the very same road, and if I could, I'd give you some advice. See, he don't care about you, all the good or the bad you do know. He wants your life, and that's the devil's price. Yeah, the devil's price.
All right, if you are listening to this, you are a member of the Great Slaptail Nation, my nation. And who am I? I'm the Beaveman, master of the universe, creator of all things great and small, and Lord High Commander of the Great Slaptail Nation Army. And you may be wondering why you've heard my intro music, but you also heard the intro music of the Trailer Park Monster, because it's a team up. It's a team up, motherfuckers. It's a collab. You know, just like when, you know, that pussy ass Superman wants to team up with Batman, and Batman's like, nah, I'm too cool. You're kind of lame. I'm not going to say that JD is like Superman, but I will say I'm like Batman. Yeah, because I am. I'm like, I just am. I'm a shorter, wiser, darker version. But anyway, with me today here in the Beaver Den, or in, I guess in Fresno, whichever way you look at it, is my friend J.D. Hutchins of the Monsters Lair, the Dark Lord of Browntown himself. The monotone with the microphone. Jesus, how many other freaking intros do you have? I mean, how many titles do you need? Lord? I guess you already have that one. All right, it's your intro. You're on you. You're on now.
Yeah, it seems like I add a new nickname every episode that I put out, but appreciate the intro. I couldn't have said it better myself if I tried. But if you're the Batman, I guess that makes me the Mothman for this episode. Huh?
Also extremely cool. The Mothman. Have you read that comic?
I have not. No.
It's the Frank I don't want to say it wrong, because all my comic book friends out there will be pretty mad if I say the name. I'm pretty sure, is it Frank Franzetta? I'm not sure. Dope comic though. Very cool. I've read the first edition, the very first comic, and it is very good. Very good. Which means now I'm going to have to try to track down the rest of them. But yeah, that's why that is kind of why Mothman is Mothman. Is it not?
That is correct. He was named after the very same Batman that was rising to popularity in the mid '60s when he was first spotted. So
Yeah, super cool.
nice little tie-in there.
Yeah, I was pretty excited, and we talk about synchronicities, you and I, quite a bit actually. And I was telling you how cool it was that I was going to West Virginia, and I know people are like, "Why were you going to West Virginia?" I don't know why people go to West Virginia. It's actually a pretty nice state. It gets a bad rap. But of course, I was listening to my favorite podcast, Last Podcast on the Left, and just so happens the week before, or the Saturday before I was going to West Virginia, they did their Mothman Redux episode 1. And as I was listening to it, I was like, holy shit. It dawned on me, I am also going to West Virginia this week. How far am I from Point Pleasant? And I was very lucky. I was only 2 hours away from it. not only did that happen, but as we were driving to our destination, which was the shit, I don't even know what it's called. I don't know. It was a really cool place where you go rafting. Adventures on the Gorge is where we stayed. Sounds kind of dirty. Sounds like there are some things going on in the gorge that you don't want to know about. But as Marcus Parks from last podcast on the left, as Point Pleasant literally came out of his mouth, we passed the exit that one direction took you to where we were going, and the other direction took you to Point Pleasant. And there was that sign. And I immediately messaged the trailer park monster. I was like, dude, you will never guess what just happened. Very cool.
Yeah, we talk about synchronicities quite a bit because it seems like a lot of people that believe in this stuff and research this paranormal stuff, they cite synchronicities as like a call sign or a mile marker, if you will, for paranormal activity. So, a lot of evidence was put forth towards that means on the documentary Hellier with Greg and Dana Newkirk, of the Newkirks, as they're known, who are a very famous, paranormal investigating couple that produce a lot of content. But yeah, that's like the whole documentary is all these synchronicities when they started investigating this paranormal activity across the same region that we're discussing, as a matter of fact, West Virginia, Gallipolis, all throughout that area. And one synchronicity just seemed like it led into another, and before you know it, they're going down this giant rabbit hole of all this weird, paranormal, strange, high strangeness activity. It was very interesting, and it
Yeah.
all ties in together with the Mothman and the goblins from that area, and a lot of lore and lore behind the Green Man, even. So it was, yeah, it's very interesting, and I like following the synchronicities and seeing, if it leads to another one, and that's kind of like the sign that you're going down the right direction and what you're looking for in the
Yeah.
paranormal community. So
Yeah, West Virginia is very cool because it has so many monsters or cryptids or alien stories. They have a lot. I mean, most states do. I mean, a lot of states do. Um, I actually had a pretty interesting conversation with a lady at the comic book store where I went there in Point Pleasant. And sorry, ma'am, if I forgot the name of your store. I will literally look your store up and post a link on there. Nicest people. But we were talking about it, because I said, I'm from Michigan. We have monsters too, mostly associated with the Great Lakes, and of course, everybody has Bigfoot. Everybody says they have Bigfoot. I mean, Bigfoot is not. Bigfoot's everywhere in the world apparently. And she was saying, yeah, of course, you have everybody has monsters, which is cool, but if you find something unique, it's great. It's good for the town. That's a town that literally has embraced the Mothman and tries to benefit from it. They have a Mothman festival every year since I think 2012 or something like that. If I'm wrong, sorry. You're never going to learn anything from this podcast except for maybe the stuff that JD tells you. I'm probably going to get dates wrong. I'm going to get names wrong. Please don't be mad. But Point Pleasant, West Virginia, if you get a chance to go, is a tiny town, but it's pretty fucking cool, steeped in some cool shit. And I am just actually impressed that JD said Gallipolis, how he said it, because apparently that's how it's said. Or you said, wait a minute, you said Gallipolis, right? Yeah.
Gallipolis, yeah.
Gallipolis. I think that's actually how it's said. As we were driving, I kept seeing that word, and I'm a word person. So if I hear a word, if I see a word and it seems weird to me, I will say it a lot just for fun, especially if I'm driving in the car. And so the Swan said it, but I was like, I'm pretty sure it's Gallipolis. I said I think it's Gallipolis, but I don't know. We're gonna have to find somebody from there to see how they say it.
I actually learned the proper pronunciation from another podcast, Astonishing Legends. I don't know if you're familiar with that podcast at all.
I am not.
They do what I do, but they do it super long form. So they dedicate like 4 or 5 episodes at a time to one subject.
Nice.
Um, but yeah, they were pronouncing it Gallipolis or Gallipolis in the first couple of episodes, and they got so much mail from people in that region saying, "No, you actually pronounce it this way." That they corrected themselves and continued the rest of the series pronouncing it that way. So for whatever reason, that sticks in my mind.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think that whole region. I mean, I think it's so lush and like verdant and just ripe with nature that it's easy to believe that these types of cryptids are out there existing in that area just because it's so untapped and it's so wild.
Yeah.
And you have so many like strange features to that area, like waterways and areas like the TNT area,
Hmm.
and things like that that just lend themselves to the legend. And I
Yeah.
think just being there and seeing all that, it kind of lends itself to these types of stories and gives them a little bit more credibility.
So let's ask your opinion on it. Because I always get conflicting. It's not conflicting. I always wonder that sometimes, from listening to your podcast and having conversations with you, I'm like, well, does JD actually believe in any of this stuff? Or are you one of those people that's like, I believe it's possible, but I want some more proof?
Primarily, I'm a skeptic, but I'm also a big fan of storytelling. And the better the story is, the more engaging it is to me, and I will get into stories and doing the research, and I will tell the stories impartially. But at the end of the day, I'm more skeptic than not. There is some things that I tend to believe a little bit more, especially right now, what we have going on with this whole UFO, unveiling, if you will. I've always said from the beginning when it comes to aliens, like the universe is so vast and so unexplored, like it's more unbelievable to me that they don't exist than they do,
Right.
just because there's so much out there that we don't know. Like it's very well possible. But when it comes to the cryptids and things, I think those are a little bit more hard to prove because these are living, breathing, physical beings. Um, that are said to be out there in the wilderness, but yet we never find any carcasses or like solid evidence or proof that these things do exist. Now, there's many theories and speculations as to why that is, but for me, the cryptids aren't as believable. But Mothman, I don't know, it just holds a special place in my heart. He is my favorite cryptid. The stories are like no other cryptid stories out there. And just the fact that it's so tied into one region specifically makes me think there's a little bit more than what we see on the surface. There's something to that. So
Yeah.
yeah, to answer your question though, I kind of waffle back and forth between skeptical and believer, and even though I am skeptic, I do like to do the stories justice on my podcast, so I will lean into them a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that I'm probably I will so much believe in all that shit that I'm like, oh yeah, I totally believe that there's a Mothman. I totally believe there's Bigfoot, all that stuff. And the whole alien thing, I'm like, oh no, there's totally aliens. What I don't believe is that if there are alien spacecraft that are coming here, I don't believe they're coming by the traditional route that we believe. If they're able to actually have those type of crafts, I'm more like either they are slipping between dimensions, through a porthole, almost like, they pop out, kind of like in the Guardians of the Galaxy, they'll hit one little hole and they're like pop out in another area. That is more realistic to me than to think that they're traveling light years in a traditional pathway to get here. That I don't buy. I'm like, no way. I'm like, I don't care how fast your ship is. You're not getting here that fast. There's got to be some other like time space continuum type lane that they're traveling in, or they're slipping between dimensions, or they're coming from the ocean. I think there might be local ones too that probably pop up.
One of the interesting theories I heard recently that my wife and I discussed a little bit was that the gray aliens specifically,
Mm-hmm.
that someone had posited that maybe these are actually humans, but through distance of time and traveling light years away and evolution, these are actually you know evolved humans that went elsewhere and adapted to that new region,
Uh-huh.
and they're coming back to visit. I thought that was kind of interesting because if a human went out into the galaxy and space somewhere, we would have to change to fit our environment. Hence the complexion of the skin turning gray, the eyes becoming enlarged and darkened, all that good stuff.
Yeah, the other thing that I thought was interesting was like our interpretation of, how everybody says this is what aliens look like. They've got they've got that shape to their face and they got the big glassy eyes or whatever. Is that somebody said those are actually goggles. Those are goggles covering their actual eyes, which I thought was really cool. But the other thing is interesting is that the evolution of the alien sightings themselves, because I was reading that book on the Hollow Earth, one of the first, I think, the first person to write the Hollow Earth book. And they were saying in there somewhere, I'm pretty sure that's where I read it. Again, you're not going to learn anything. I could be wrong. But the original quote alien sightings of the alien people look like little Mexicans in like green jumpsuits. So I'm like, so has racism changed things? Are we now more like, or what actually changed where the idea of, or was it just, we just don't get visited by them anymore? And it's, the Greys and the reptilians or whatever, and all that other stuff that we're actually getting visited by.
Are you familiar with any of the Kelly Hopkinsville sightings?
No, you'll have to explain it. I might have heard of it, but I'm terrible with names. I can't even tell you the members of my favorite bands.
So the Kelly Hopkinsville encounters, they happened down in the South. The exact state escapes me. I want to say like Tennessee or somewhere. Wherever Kelly Hopkinsville is, if you're listening and you're from that area, send John some hate mail later.
Right.
But uh, basically, it was a family in a rural area that were staying in their house in like a cabin type home, and they were, you know, a large family. They all lived in the home together, and they were visited by these goblin-like creatures that were wearing like what you were describing, like they stated like a shimmery type spacesuit, and that's an early sighting. I think that happens in like the 50s or 60s era, and that was one of the early sightings of like small green goblin-like creatures, and that's one that people cite a lot for this high strangeness, because after the Kelly Hopkinsville sighting, similar to like the Mothman sighting, there was a flap that had occurred, and
Okay.
like all these different types of high strangeness type activities started appearing. Men in Black, um, all that different stuff that comes with, seems like always come with these types of sightings, and
Right.
that's one of the first.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, the other thing that I thought was interesting, and I was reading that probably in this very good book that I will now tell everyone about, that this really nice person in Braxton County at Flatwoods told me to buy. It is called Monsters of West Virginia: Mysterious Creatures in the Mountain State by Rosemary Ellen. Sorry, Rosemary.
There's a Guiley.
Guiley? Guiley? Guiley.
Guy.
She's a big paranormal person.
Rosemary Ann Guiley is a old coast to coast favorite
Sweet.
from back in the day.
And apparently she appears at the Mothman Festival every year. So that's cool. Definitely want to go check that out, hopefully. But she was telling a story about the graft, and was it the Grafton monster? And there were some theories out there. I'm not sure who said it. I don't know if it was John Keel or whoever, or experts throughout. Anyway, you got to read the book. But was saying that it actually makes sense when you think about it. Like with the Grafton monster, doesn't really have a head, just this big white hunk of something. Where people were speculating on why they haven't seen it again. There's only like very limited sightings. It was like 3 sightings in a short period of time. And they kept speculating, like, well, why haven't we seen it again? It's been decades, whatever. And someone said, well, if you think about it, maybe it is reasonable to think that, like, if we do space exploration or if we go explore something, we send something to see how they will tolerate the atmosphere or how they will tolerate the trip, much like how we, originally it was a dog that went to space and then chimpanzee, and or even how you send the canary down into the mine. So maybe that's what the Grafton monster was. Maybe that was their little sentry that they sent out there to see how it would tolerate the atmosphere, how it would tolerate the surroundings. And then they picked it up, and then to see if it was okay for the other stuff to come down and search or what have you. I thought that was a pretty cool theory. Like, that's actually kind of makes sense.
Yeah, he. I mean, that's a interesting theory. He's like a scout, if you will, a recon.
Yeah, but I think one that they don't care about. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, well, it's also kind of ignorant to think that like, oh, everybody's like humans. Let's just send a lesser being. But maybe everything is like that. Very good call though on sending me to Flatwoods to check out the Braxton County Monster or Braxy or whatever you want to call it. That's a cool story, but it's interesting that in the town they don't seem like it doesn't seem like a major story for them. I mean, it does, but the story that you hear is very minor. It makes you think, oh, it's nothing. So here's a quick rundown of the story as I understood it before I read multiple other accounts. Some kids were playing. They saw a big, bright flash of light go across the sky, and they assumed this was going to land on somebody's farm. So they take off to home. A couple of the kids go their own separate ways, but a couple of the kids go to their house. They grab their mom, who wants to go with them, and she rings up somebody and says, "Hey, go with us," who's like in the National Guard. So they head off to where they think this bright light landed. And when they get there, they encounter like a mist, which makes them nauseous. And then they see this figure that has red eyes, a spade shaped head. It's like 10 or 12 feet tall. And it looks like it's wearing a big metal dress and it's floating. And then when they hit it with their flashlight, basically it hisses at them and drifts towards them. And they freak the fuck out and run away, which is understandable. And later on, they're all like vomiting because they don't feel good. So people go to the crash site or whatever that site was where they saw it, and they find like some oily substances on the ground. And that's the very minimum story. They all draw pictures of what they think it looks like, and their drawings all look alike, basically. And kind of a cool drawing if you get a chance to look it up. But that was this very minor story. I'm like, well, that's kind of an interesting story. But then, of course, you automatically read about what everybody says it actually is. They're like, well, clearly it was just a bard, not barn. Everybody calls it a barn owl. It's not a barn owl. It's a bard owl. There's a D. Sitting in a tree, they spooked the owl and it flew towards them and they all shit themselves and ran off. It's a very downplaying of the story. Not nearly as cool as the very involved story in Monsters of West Virginia. A much, much more detailed story that is much, much better because when I heard that very minor story, I was like, oh, it totally was an owl in a tree. Clearly it was an owl in a tree. But if you read the more detailed story, you're like, oh, does not sound like an owl in the tree because more than one occurrence, well, occurred.
Yeah, those people that say the Flatwoods Monster is a barred owl are the same people that say that Mothman is a Sandy Hill crane.
Yeah, fuck them.
So, yeah. And also to tie it back in, the Kelly Hopkinsville monsters were, later on they were said to be. I think they used both of the classic disproving stories of swamp gas and forget what they called them. Frogs. I think it was frogs. They were giant frogs.
They were giant frogs.
Yes,
Okay.
in spacesuits attacking a home and being shot at.
So some reptile lover was really bored and stitched up a bunch of little spacesuits for frogs and played dress up. Is that what they're saying?
I don't know what the pastimes of rural America were during that time, but I would venture to say that's probably not one of them, but who knows?
I mean, they're very bored. Clearly, they're very, very bored. You can only make so much moonshine. You can only kiss your sister so many times. Okay, I'm gonna make West Virginia mad. You can only kiss your sister so many times. Sorry, West Virginia. You are some of the nicest people I've encountered in a very long time. Let me say this about West Virginia. Every person I talked to in West Virginia was so polite that I got back home and I was like, God, everybody in Michigan's an asshole. That's how polite they were. Super, super nice. Yeah. But if you get a
I can't
chance to
even
go,
imagine.
yeah, if you get a chance to go to Flatwoods, though, people go. They have this most cute, and I'll post this somewhere. They have the cutest Braxy in their visitor center. It looks like a giant doll. I'm like, well, if Braxy actually looked like that in real life out in the woods, you'd probably want to give him a big hug or her or whatever.
The other theory I've heard on the initial sighting too was that it was necessarily not the exact appearance of that creature at all, that it was actually something inside a mech suit.
That makes sense.
That was scaring off the kids because, we're we went down where we've crashed, and now I got to get people away from us so we can get the heck out of here. So it was more of like a scare tactic by whatever beings supposedly crash landed to, like, keep people away. Which, if you read through some of the more detailed descriptions, it would make sense because a lot of people say it had like a metallic gleam to the body.
Yeah.
So
And it was like hovering. So it looked like it was hovering. So that would make sense. Well, what I thought was cool is that there was another sighting, but nobody the people that had the other sighting they didn't report it for like years. And that sighting was really interesting where they actually came across it in their vehicle and the entity or whatever touched their vehicle and left like scorch marks on the top of their car where it touched
hmm,
it. But they didn't report it because they didn't want anybody to think they were nuts. And it was a husband, a wife, and like their 18-month-old kid, which really, if they are a little kid, which that kid that was in the car would be in their 70s now. I don't know if they're still alive, but
right. Which could lend some credence to the theories that it was possibly mechanic in nature if it's leaving scorch marks on
yeah,
something that it touched.
yeah,
So, but yeah, pretty interesting. I mean, it's crazy to me how many stories they have just in that small region, small area. It makes you wonder, like, what's really going on.
yeah. Well, I'm not going to bust this person out too much. I'm not going to say where my source is from, but it was in West Virginia and it was the town in Point Pleasant. And so I asked this person they're probably in their 60s, maybe pushing 70, who lives there. And I asked them, I said, hey, so what's the deal with the Mothman? I said, do you believe in Mothman? And she said, you want me to tell you the real story? And I said, well, of course I want you to tell me the quote, real story. And she's like, Mothman is not a thing like you guys think it is. It's not like they say. She's like, now Mothman, the big red glowing eyes, that was a prank that was done by some like young men, and they used a car battery and some flashlights to make the red eyes. And the one of the stories about where somebody got told the police that Mothman chased their car was actually because they were pulled over by the cops, and they came up with a story because they'd been drinking and driving. Now, let me shoot some holes through that story. First hole in the story. It used to be legal to drink and drive.
Mm,
As far back as I can remember, in the 70s and early 80s, at least in Michigan, and I can't imagine West Virginia was too different, you could drive around in your car and drink open containers. I used to get in the car with my grandma and her boyfriend, sit in the back seat, and we would grab like a 12 pack and I would hand them endless beers as we drove. So I don't know if I believe that first part. The other part of it is I don't see any record of that story anywhere because the story that I see is the two couples was the initial sighting and they went to the cops. It was the cops didn't track them down. They went to the cops. So I don't know if it's a different story. I'm not going to shoot holes in her story. And I don't know. Maybe she's an agent of the MIB and is trying to throw me off her track. I don't know.
that's a good possibility. I mean, that's their whole game, right? Is disinformation agents distract and manipulate and get you as far away from the real answers as possible. So,
Yeah. But I'm
but
going to seriously doubt
um,
it. I seriously doubt she's a cool lady.
right. But yeah, I mean, drinking and driving laws came in what, the 80s.
Probably. I believe so.
So 1966 in small town West Virginia probably didn't have too many laws going on, and even if they did, are you the small town local cop that's going to stop a couple of kids at a known hangout area in the TNT area to, you know, hem them up? Probably unlikely.
Right. Well, I guess the other part of it is I didn't really think about too is though in the South, which West Virginia is not the South, in case you don't know geographically, folks. There are dry counties where they said you can't drink, even though Michigan was big on their drunk driving. So maybe that's possible. I don't know. I don't know the laws back then in West Virginia. Maybe that was a county thing. Who knows? But she did say this. she didn't say that Mothman wasn't real, really. What she was saying was that the way it's depicted is not correct.
Hmm.
What she said was that during that time, she was actually a sophomore in high school when that all happened. She said there was a giant black bird, and that was a thing. And they did have multiple sightings of it during that time frame. And I said, okay, that's interesting. I'm like, so when you say giant black bird, you think it was some like natural type bird? Or she's like, no. She's like, it was a giant black bird. And I don't know if it was real, not real, spiritual, whatever. She's like, but I do believe it came here to warn us. So that was interesting.
So she was a believer in the portent of doom theory.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah. She just said the
But
depiction of Mothman wasn't accurate.
see, and I've heard multiple depictions of Mothman too. We have like the one that we see most often, the big giant bipedal winged demon looking guy. And then we got one that's more of like a cotton ball with legs
Yeah.
and a couple of antennas sticking up, more like an insect like. Or like, if you looked at an actual moth, how they're kind of furry,
Mm-hmm.
like that. And then I've heard depictions where he's completely wingless altogether.
Oh,
He's just kind of like a hulking dark mass, kind of like this guy back here,
that's when he's in his pupil stage.
right? So, it's hard to say what the actual definitive appearance of Mothman is unless you go back and you ask the two couples that are said to have first seen him, back in 1966, hovering after their car,
Yeah.
tearing ass out of that TNT area to get away from it. So,
Well, I can remember reading this story when I was in like either elementary school or middle school, back when they had cool books in the library. And Mothman was pretty prominent in one of the books that I had. And the depiction of Mothman in those books was like, you remember the cartoon with Bugs Bunny where there's that red monster that chases him all over the place and it's just got like
oh,
feet.
okay.
It's just
Yeah.
this big, that's what Mothman looks like with wings, where the eyes are set in like the chest. Um, so that's how I always think of it. Obviously, the statue in Point Pleasant is just like a bipedal, like jacked moth dude with a moth head with wings, which looks dope. But that was not my depiction, not the, in my head that I have of what they were talking about.
Yeah, I tend to think of him, the mental image of him is more like you're talking about, but with the big red glowing eyes that is prominent with stories surrounding him.
Yeah,
Um, so I don't know. I haven't looked into it though. I got to look more into the Chicago flap,
yeah,
Mothman 2, and see what people are describing it as with that region, and if it's changed or um, if it's similar to some of the sightings from the original flap or what. I think that would be interesting to kind of look into.
yeah. The interesting thing with those, I read that very briefly about that one, and it's nothing bad happened with those sightings. Whereas, there's the Silver Bridge collapse in Point Pleasant, but nothing bad happened with that one. And then I'm interested to see what the last podcast on the left guys come up with, because they'd said something about two sightings of Mothman around the time of 9/11, and then there's sightings of Mothman in other countries, which is
Hmm.
very, very interesting.
Yeah, I'm going to be interested to follow up with the 9/11 thing because I had never heard that until they had mentioned it
Yeah,
on their show.
yeah. I had not.
But at the same time, I haven't taken time out of my day to sit down and look up 9/11 lore either. So,
Right.
because I mean, if you go too far down that hole, then you start getting into conspiracy theory and the government was in on it and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's strangely what's still kind of new to me. Even though it's been that long, I'm like, yeah, I still don't want to know too much. I still don't want to look at it too deeply, personally. But
Yeah, that's the thing with the whole portent of doom situation is like obviously they they were predecessors to some pretty gnarly events in human history with a lot of loss of life, and it's after a while it starts bumming you out, stops being fun. So
right, yeah. Here's my interesting thing, and then I didn't bring this up to her, and I really wanted to ask her because I was like, oh, my family's waiting for me. I can't have an hour-long conversation with this lady. But I had told her about the whole 9/11 thing and Chicago thing too, and she's like, oh, I hadn't heard that. That's pretty interesting. So she's probably gonna go. She probably went down a rabbit hole after I talked to her. But then I asked her about the whole bird thing, whether she thought it was a real bird, not a bird. She's like, yeah, it's definitely a real bird. I don't know if it was like if it was a phenomenon or if it was an actual like a bird that we just haven't seen before. I said, yeah, that whole bird thing is really goofy about the whole sandhill crane thing. She's like, oh, why is that? I'm like, well, because they're prevalent in Michigan. We have them all over the place. I'm like, they look nothing like your depiction of the Mothman from the stories. One, they're super dumb birds. You could go up to it and knock it over. It's not going to do anything. And the idea that people think it has glowing red eyes, it doesn't have glowing red eyes. It has red fleshy feathers around its eyes. You can only see during the daytime. Can't really see that.
Does it have any eye shine at all?
I mean, if it does, I'm sure it's it's probably like anything else. I mean, my dog has a red eye shine,
Right.
but so not like the size that they're describing. So and they're not aggressive birds. It can't go 100 miles an hour chasing a car down the road and then pop up in front of it, as it comes around a corner. So none of that.
So you've never personally mistaken a sandhill crane as a giant Mothman?
No, and they're loud too. They don't shut the fuck up. So and they're everywhere. So no, I would never mistake that at all. But here's what I think, and this is the question I really wanted to ask this lady, but I was like, no, my family's waiting. So I'm going to ask you. So let's say that the Mothman, quote unquote, is not or was not at that time a real thing. Do you think that it's possible that here we are 60 years later, still interested in the Mothman, that we've all thought it into existence and it does now exist?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of the thought form or egregore or tulpa, whatever you want to refer to it as, line of thinking. I think a lot of our Bigfoot sightings are because of that. Like, we talk about it so much, and it's such a cultural iconic thing that, like, if you see anything out in the woods that's a little bit strange or out of the ordinary or that you don't expect, that's like the mental image that immediately you conjure up, like, oh, it's Bigfoot. Same thing with Mothman. Um, but yeah, I think that's very possible, especially if you research the tulpa uh, in general. Like, a lot of it is just, basically psyching yourself up to see this type of stuff. And, eyewitness testimony is faulty at best. You can talk to any investigator of any type of crime, private investigators, they'll all tell you, like, firsthand eyewitness testimony is usually the worst and least reliable, because the human brain fills in the gaps of what we see and don't, recognize immediately, and our brains just take over and can oftentimes get carried away and start replacing the missing pieces with whatever it thinks should fit there. I think it's very possible that theory it holds some water.
Yeah, and it's also just like you say, I can't remember everything that happened yesterday. But if you want me to describe it to you, I'm going to fill in unnecessary details to make it an actual story. And even with great reporters, great writers, they do the same thing. So, what's the actual initial story? And especially if they manipulate the story over time to make it a better story. Did they obviously all these different sightings of the Mothman occur? I would say, yeah, probably. But like I said, everybody's been thinking about it for so long that could we have possibly thought Mothman into true existence, which would be pretty dope. Because if I keep thinking about it, if I really think about it hard enough, eventually we will get these really gorgeous humanoid robots, and that'll be dope. That do whatever we say, whenever we say, and they're also inexpensive, if not free. So I'll just keep thinking about that also.
Well, it's like I always say, I personally welcome our robot overlords with open arms.
That
So
is good that you say that. I also welcome them. Anyway, back to Point Pleasant. Very cool place. What I also thought was really weird about Point Pleasant, West Virginia, is if you walk across the street from the Mothman Museum, you can go down near the river. They have like a little river walk, and they have like murals on the side of the wall as you walk, and it tells the story of people fucking each other up during the wars with the indigenous people. And there's a statue of Chief Stalk of Corn or Chief Cornstalk, and Lord Douchebag is like two statues away from him. And I'm just sitting there. I think I sent you a picture too. I was like, "Oh, person who loves genocide." Here we go. Let me send this to you. And I was like, "Why the fuck do they have this? Like, why do we cling to that?" I'm like, "Why do places cling to that?" I'm like, "Why would you have this statue?" It's Dunsmore, right? I think Lord Dunsmore.
Yeah,
I feel like,
Dunsmore.
yeah. And I'm like, why? Why do we have that? And then there's the statue of Chief Cornstalk. He's two statues away. And then the general that like led the army or the fighting men is a statue right next to Chief Cornstalk. And there's like a little plaque there that says they both fought for what they believed in, or some shit like that.
Trying to be impartial.
I was like, what is this crap? Like, what is this crap?
Yeah. Like I understand like, honoring regional history and stuff, but do we have to sugarcoat it? And on top of that, can Chief Cornstalk maybe get his own area or at least a different section to where he's not surrounded by the douchebags that literally like led to his demise? Seems like a slap in the face a little bit, but
Well, I mean, and tell the story. Like, Chief Cornstalk did not fight for what he believed in. Chief Cornstalk took him and his son to say, "Hey, I just want to make peace and make sure everything's cool." And they locked him up and then killed him.
yeah.
Like, he was not at war with anybody. But whatever.
Talk about history repeating
Yeah,
itself. Huh?
yeah, exactly. Thankfully though, this is also really cool. I don't know if you know this, and I don't remember if I told you. Apparently that hotel there is super haunted.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's the Lowe Hotel, I believe is what it's called. So if you go on YouTube, I'll have to post a link to one of them. There's people that have, some of them are just like, "Oh, let me just film the hotel." The whole hotel itself is super cool on the inside. I'm gonna have to check it out. I will not be staying there because I am not a white man. I do not do dumb shit like that. The reasonable half Mexican in me says, "No, you will not go ghost hunting in a hotel and stay in a room that is supposedly haunted just to see if anything will happen." I do not do that. I am not fucking stupid.
Go looking for Mothman, stay for the ghosts. Huh?
Right. What's really interesting? I was thinking about this the other day. Is that all these people who will go and do that stuff? Like, I'm gonna go stay in this haunted hotel. I'm gonna film all night. It's super fucking creepy, and they go do that. And people watch those shows or they watch those videos and like, that guy is so brave. And then people like me watch it and go, that guy is so stupid. What are they gonna do if something actually happens? Not only that, this person is not brave, people. You know what's brave? I'll tell you what's brave. You go to downtown Detroit in a really nice car. You wear a polo shirt, khakis, deck cider shoes, and a Rolex. You go to the burned out housing area in the hood in Detroit. You get out, you go up to the nearest group of people that you find, you whip out your wallet and ask them if they have change for 100. That's a video I would like to see. And you keep doing that. So even if you're successful in the first one, they give you change for 100, they don't give you any problems at all. I want you to keep doing it until somebody beats the fucking shit out of you. And then I will say, wow, that guy's really brave. I'll also say he's stupid like the ghost hunter, but he's really fucking brave because at least he risked something.
Right. And what drives me crazy about it? I think I mentioned this going back on the anger issue, the episode that we did. These ghost investigators, hunters, whatever you want to call them, they go to these locations looking for proof of the paranormal, and then as soon as something minorly creepy happens, they're like trying to GTFO and like backpedal and get away from it. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, you went there, weird shit happened, and you ran away from it when you're there trying to seek answers and get proof of paranormal activity. but yet you can't document anything because the camera's going like this because you're running away from
They're
stuff.
running.
Like, what are you guys doing, man? It drives me nuts. Every ghost show is like that. Like, I get it's become like a formula now, and that's what sells or whatever, but I'd like to one time see a ghost hunter show where something creepy happens and they run towards it instead of away from it in the opposite direction.
Yeah, I mean, they really
So,
should. I mean, they definitely should. They're like, what do you got, bitch? What, you got something to say? And this is why ghost hunters typically are not Mexican or black. Because if you did that to my, it's true. If you did that to let's say my mother was a ghost hunter. All right. She goes into one of these scary fucking houses and something paranormal happens. My mother would be like, "Who?" And she doesn't swear. But I'm gonna say as if I'm swearing like her. She would be like, "Who the fuck are you?" She'd be taking off her little high heel, and you better fucking get out of there, Ghost, because my mom's gonna hit you with that shoe.
about to chunkle that ass.
Exactly. So that shit is like, you want a real ghost hunter? Send a bunch of like elderly ethnic mothers in there. Let's see what happens with that. That would be a show that I would love to watch.
Right. That's the real Ghostbusters right there. They'll if there is paranormal activity, it won't be there for much longer.
Yeah, I want to see a Middle Eastern mom. I want to see a Mexican mom. Give them all shoes that they can easily take off. I'd like to see a black mom. Actually, make them all grandmothers. Let's get them out there. We don't need a white mother. She might, I don't know. She might not hit the ghost. I don't know. She might feel like that's wrong. Unless we get one from the south. I don't know.
The white mom will be too busy like sorting her crystals and crap to even show up on time.
Right.
So
Just get them out there. That's what I want to see.
we need like an elderly like Chinese or Japanese grandmother,
Oh
maybe
yeah,
even Laotian or Hmong.
something cool like that.
Yeah, they have an interesting relationship to death as it is. So
Like, oh, you think you're a demon? Let me conjure some shit for you. We got a Haitian mom in there, got a Haitian grandmother. Oh, you think you're badass? Let me just cut the head off this chicken real quick. I'll show you what a demon is, motherfucker. That I would watch.
bring the hoodoo, right?
We got to pitch that show. Let's see that show.
That's what I'm saying. I'm down. I think we got ourselves a concept. Hopefully, no one listens to this and steals it.
Nobody steal our show idea. Yeah, the Haitian mom would be hilarious. You're like, what? Oh. Some Santeria mom out there just whips out a bunch of candles.
Right.
That'd be dope. That would be dope. So yeah, you're gonna have to check out that hotel, guys. It looks really pretty though. I'm like, no, I'm not staying in that. I'm not staying in that. I'll find me a Best Western.
What was the name of it again?
The Lowe,
The Lowe.
the Historic Lowe Hotel. Quite sure that's what it is.
And that's in Point Pleasant, or that's one of the surrounding
It
areas.
is right in Point Pleasant. It is just a few doors down on the opposite side of the street of the Mothman Hotel. JD's gonna go stay there now. I can tell already. He's that.
Oh yeah, I've had my eyes set on Point Pleasant for a long time. So
JD is that white guy who's like, no, I'm gonna do it. What we'll do is we'll go down together. And then you can just remote text me. You can FaceTime me. I'll be staying in Gallipolis in a hotel. Gallipolis, Golly. You know what I mean. I can get some hate emails now. I'll be staying there, and then I'll just FaceTime you. You let me know how it goes.
there we go.
And then if I just see your beanie, like from your nose up and your nose is running, I'm like, oh, you gotta get the fuck out of there, man.
Right.
I see you start dancing. Oh, face to the wall, starts dancing.
You get a long shot just of me standing in the corner.
Yep. Like, why is this in green and white? What is going on here? You have an iPhone. What is going on here?
So did you guys get a chance to check out any of the nightlife down in Point Pleasant? What was that like?
We did not. No, we went there. Though we just kind of hung out the first day because we went to Flatwoods first, which is a very pretty little town. Flatwoods. We went and hung out at the library. Cool story at the library because I had to go to the bathroom. There's no place to go. Went in the library, and while I was in the bathroom, the Swan was talking to the librarian who took her on a tour of the library, which was very nice of them. Because they were having book sales. You could put as many books as you want into a bag, and it was $1. It's a good deal. I personally did not want to grab a bunch of books, but I grabbed two. We found one by Carrie Fisher, whom I love. And if you don't know who that is, don't listen to my fucking podcast anymore. And
That's
then
Princess Leia for anyone out there not sure.
I found this other book about the Japanese internment camps during World War II, which looked like it's going to be a good book. So we're going there, and I went to check out and pay my 50 cents for these two books. And the little old lady who checked me out, separate little old lady, got to be like in her late 70s. She's like, "Oh, you know, my nephew was her personal assistant for several years, uh, a long time ago." I'm like, that's freaking cool. What are the odds of us grabbing a book in Flatwoods, West Virginia, giving it to a little old lady at the library, and her saying, "Hey, my nephew used to be her personal assistant and lived in Hollywood."
Sounds like another synchronicity to me. It sounds like you guys were on the right path there at the
Yeah,
library.
I know. And I kept saying, I'm like, when am I going to see? When am I going to see one of these cryptids then?
It's kind of like in the Matrix when deja vu happens. You know some shit's about to go down.
Yeah.
It's like doing this paranormal investigation when a synchronicity happens. That's how you know you're you know you're on the path going in the right direction.
Yeah, we had a
It's
bunch
what
of
they
stuff
say.
lined up. We had a bunch of stuff lined up that was really cool.
And it's interesting. You shouted out the Japanese internment situation because of all places, randomly Fresno, a very big location for Japanese internment
Wow.
during that time. Our actual entire fairgrounds was used as a giant camp during that whole situation. So there's a
Ah.
lot of history on that here locally.
So what about the idea that an area can actually hold negative energy from trauma?
I I wholeheartedly believe that. That goes back into the stone tape theory. I did a quick, brief episode on that myself.
Nice shameless plug. Nice shameless plug there.
Yeah,
What episode? What episode was that?
stone tape theory episode. No, but yeah, I totally buy into that. Like, you know, when tragic events or life altering events happen, like there's a lot of energy taking place, and certain things like dirt, wood, stone, hence the name stone tape theory, limestone, especially for whatever reason, people seem to state in the paranormal community that that's a big energy absorber. These are the same types of people that I jokingly refer to about the crystals and stuff. Like, certain minerals, certain rocks, certain topography can absorb and hold on to that energy that's expelled during like sudden deaths or tragic events or big disasters such as the Silver Bridge collapse, things like that. Water is another big energy conductor. If you believe in the relation of EMF to paranormal activity, electromagnetic fields, water, metal, anything that would conduct electricity um, would conduct EMF as well and contain that energy that's stored up from those like big exhalations of energy during these times of great loss or big events that occur.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Also, if you tie it back into like the whole Big Bang theory, that's all we are to begin with is energy in the first place.
Right.
It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think that's true that an area will hold on to some trauma. Even if it doesn't, it makes it very helpful if you're going to curse somebody later on. You're like, oh, you're building that on top of this, so you're subjected to this curse, this little curse imp that I'm going to plant in your mind, so that if anything ever bad happens to you, you're going to go back to that curse. Yeah, it's like the whole curse that's on the curse that people in West Virginia actually still mention this. That lady actually mentioned it too, that Chief Cornstalk cursed West Virginia. But if you think about it, like somebody else wrote this, like Chief Cornstalk probably did not have time to utter a really long curse on West Virginia. He probably was killed pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have time for a really long couple paragraph curse. Because apparently that actual story comes from like a screenplay that was written or something like that after the
Right.
fact.
And a lot of people link the Mothman to Chief Cornstalk and that curse as well, saying, he may not be the direct result, but he's definitely a side effect of whatever, curse or hex or whatever is on that area. Which, I mean, if you think about it, the TNT area in itself is like a physical hex on that area, being a super fun site, and all the stuff leaking out of there and contaminating that area that could lead to animals evolving into what might be the Mothman. Um, so, you know, whether you think about it in a paranormal sense or like a environmental disaster sense, that area is indeed cursed, one way or the other.
Yeah, much like lots of places throughout the country related to, manufacturing in general. I mean, a lot of coal mine collapses in West Virginia, explosions, all kinds of fun stuff.
All right.
Lots of dead towns that were there, 50 years ago and are not there anymore. All kinds of fun stuff.
And I mean, that region being Appalachia, I mean, there's a lot of folklore in that area as well, and a lot of that stuff lends itself to these types of stories too. That whole region and the people that live there are kind of believers in this stuff to begin with from childhood. They hear these stories growing up, or they have these weird like what's it, wives' tales
Yeah.
and home remedies for things, and I forget what it's called. It's like the white witches, like healing and that type of stuff. So it's like already a part of that culture of that region to believe in this stuff as is. And then you have these weird events that occur. It all snowballs, and then we end up with stories like the Mothman, the Grafton Monster, uh, the Flatwoods Monster, all the crazy UFO activity, Men in Black sightings, injured cold,
Yeah.
the gamut.
Yeah, I'm hoping that the last podcast on the left guys are going to do a big episode on the cold dude. Seems like it would be pretty interesting. Because I would definitely never try to duplicate what they do. Oh my God, that would be nearly impossible.
Yeah,
I just like to do the ignorant portion of it where I do very little research. That's my thing. I think everybody knows that. Very little research, a lot of opinions and speculations on my part. That's what I like to do.
I like to do the research, but anymore it gets hard to do because, especially with the internet, using the internet as a tool, you find over time that a lot of these sites are basically just regurgitating the same
Sure.
story
Yeah.
over and over again and just aggregating the same stuff. And you get to like 5, 6 pages deep on a web page search, and you're like, I'm not going to find anything new on this.
Hmm.
And then you have to go and resort to old school means and hit the library or look up news stories or things of that nature.
Yeah, I mean that's still the best way to go in my opinion. I mean, when we went to West Virginia, I was like, man, I can't wait to get there because I'm assuming they're going to have books and probably a lot of them. Now, Flatwoods only had they just had like two books. One was like Cooking with Cryptids. It's like a children's cookbook. I was like, no, I probably don't need that one. But I did get the Monsters of West Virginia one. And then when I was at the Mothman Museum, I got like 6 books. And the nice thing about the people who write those books is they usually have some sort of a good bibliography. So if you want to find additional books, you look at what they use as resources, and then you can find more books, and then the other ones are going to do the same thing. And then now you've got got a good library going.
Right. Well, it's like you cited with the Rosemary Ellen Guiley thing. I mean, just look at her bibliography. She
Yeah.
covers all paranormal topics, and she runs the gamut on everything.
Yeah.
I believe she passed away in 2019 or 2020. I want to say.
Well, then I guess
I
she will
could be
not
wrong.
be at Mothman Festival 2023.
But I mean, her backlog. I mean, she's been doing this paranormal stuff since God knows when. So before it was even cool, as they say.
Yeah, she's wrote a lot of books. I'm excited to look at some see if I can snag some of her books too. So let's see, what was else I was going to say? So we covered the topo, we covered the Big Bird. That lady's the one who told me about that the hotel was haunted. She's like, "Oh, just so you know, our hotel's haunted." She's like, "Yeah, it's got like multiple ghosts." So that's what's funny is that people in very casual conversation will just go, "Oh yeah, well our hotel's also haunted." And it's not like she was getting a profit if I go to stay there, which I won't be staying
Right.
there. Once again, I will not be staying there. But just in casual conversation, oh, just so you know, our hotel is also haunted. Like, thank you, great. Now I'm gonna have to look that up. There's some really good videos out there of some people staying there and freaking themselves the fuck out. That's very
Cool.
funny.
I'm gonna have to research it. Maybe I'll make that a topic in one of my episodes and cover
Yeah, you
some
definitely
stories
should
from that
because
place.
there's I think they have 3 or 4 ghosts on different floors and different rooms. So that one's pretty cool.
I guess when you live in Point Pleasant and like any general direction that you walk in has some kind of scary, terrifying monster haunting its area, I guess ghosts are no big deal.
Right. I mean, yeah, ghosts are kind of like, that's kind of lame. Yeah, we got ghosts. I mean, nothing's as cool as the Mothman. Still my favorite. Although, according to Marcus, he ranks behind the Chupacabra for most well known.
See, but I blame that on Marcus's geography.
Yeah, he grew up in
Being
Texas.
yeah, being a Texas man, Chupacabra, La Lechuza, those are a lot bigger deals in that region
Hmm.
than they are to like the U.S. overall. So I could see him, growing up hearing all these chupacabra stories, or like he cited on the podcast, being absolutely terrified that La Lechuza was going to come for him,
Hmm.
and it's pretty funny. Like out here in California, La Llorona is more of a bigger deal than like probably the rest of the country,
Yeah.
just because of our water features and our dependency on water, and her being a water spirit and having a large Hispanic demographic. Obviously it holds a little bit more water, pun intended,
Yeah.
out here on the West Coast.
Yeah. What's interesting, like about my mother, who doesn't believe in any of this stuff, is what she says. Doesn't believe in any of this stuff, but apparently has some really cool stories. She just won't share them. She has a La Llorona story that happened to like her uncle. We have like a great aunt that apparently could shapeshift into an owl, which my mom says is bullshit, but all of my other family believes it. But she won't tell the story. So all kinds of stuff like that. I'm like, okay, well, you got some cool stories. You just refuse to share them because you're like, nah, that shit doesn't happen. Like, God, you're so white. But she's not. She isn't. But no. So I keep trying to drag him out of her, but she won't give me the stories.
Yeah, the owl lady's a cool one. I mean, it doesn't get much more creepier than the giant owl wolf. I mean, wolf, the giant owl lady hybrid that screeches at you all night until you fall asleep. So
Yeah, that's cool.
I could see that being terrifying as a kid, hearing those stories and like, okay, time for bed, and you're like, oh shit.
Yeah, but I mean, if your aunt was cool, you're like, oh, she's pretty cool. My aunt can shapeshift into an owl. That's pretty sweet.
Right, right.
Yeah.
As long as she's on your side, it's cool.
Yeah, you just don't piss her off. You don't
Yeah,
piss her off. That's all you got to do. And you definitely don't change into a bat because owls like to eat bats. So the natural predator of the bat is the owl. So you just don't do it.
right.
Well, cool. What's our next plan then? What's part two? What's part two? We haven't even talked about how the depiction of the Men in Black is not what the Men in Black are. They tried to make it too cool. They made it too cool.
Right. Yeah, I think Men in Black would be an excellent part too, and that we can delve a little bit more into the injured cold situation and his sighting and some of those stories that came out of the area there after the initial Mothman flap and all the weird high strangeness other than Mothman that occurred around the same time.
I think that's a good idea. And then that gives us time too to research the Historic Lowe Hotel. Man, if I'm saying that wrong, I'm just gonna look it up real quick. Like, pretty sure that's what it's called. Oh yeah, it is. It's the Historic Lowe Hotel in Point Pleasant. Very cool. Very cool. And I'll put some links on there. Some guys visiting it who creeped themselves out, which is very funny. And yeah, you have to check that one out, JD. You might have to do an episode on that. That might be our request for JD, who's a better researcher than I can't say JD's a better researcher than me because I don't research. So the mere fact that I don't do it doesn't make me a bad researcher. It just means I don't do it. That's my defense.
My biggest strategy in researching is, straying away from what I said about the web searches and getting 15 different versions of the same story. Just trying to pick out the stories that aren't as common and following those. That's where I start gleaming, these one offs and interesting stories that I tell on my show because I find these things that I don't find or see anywhere else or anyone else covering. And that's what I like to gravitate towards.
Yeah, I think that one would be a good one to cover because I never heard of it. I'm sure there's lots of fun stories out there about it. I kind of want to go back though. I kind of want to go back to Point Pleasant. I'm just not going to stay at the hotel. I would like to go back for the Mothman Festival. I think that would be fun.
It seems like a good time.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, I think we've covered quite a bit, or maybe we did, maybe we didn't. I don't know. Either way, we had fun. That's all that matters to me. I don't even remember what we just talked about. That's why I would not be a good first person witness. I don't even know what we said, and that's okay. All right. Well, I don't have to shout out JD because he's here. So I will shout out Skylar Creates on Twitch. He's back at it again. Good for him. And also, I can shout this out. We have an upcoming comedy show at the Crawl Space Comedy Theater, September 22nd. I don't have the full cast lineup yet because I'm waiting on one comic to get back with me. But yeah, we're going to do it. And then we're going to do it again on Veterans Day in November, where I'll be looking for an all veteran cast. So if you know anybody who's fucking funny, send them my way. Email me at slaptailnation. Nope, that's not it. slaptailsquad@gmail.com, or they can find me on Instagram at slaptailsquad. And of course, you can also find me on Facebook, Slaptail Squad. And then just send me a message. Send me a clip, comedians, so I can see who wants to be booked under the great banner of the Slaptail Nation at the Crawl Space Comedy Theater. That's it. That's all I got. This is where you advertise yourself. There you go.
I actually want to shout out Skylar Creates myself. It seems like he's turning into quite a top-notch stand-up comedian from what I've seen. So definitely go and search his stuff out if you're listening.
Yeah, he's funnier than I am, that's for sure.
But as far as the Monsters Lair goes, I'm basically going to be wrapping up soon. I usually wrap up around Halloween and do a special Halloween episode, and then take a hiatus and a break until March. That gives me time to research everything and collect new stories and start getting some pre-recording done so I can roll the episodes out when the time comes for a release date. So probably looking at a few more episodes before October, and then wrapping up and doing my special Halloween episode that I do every year.
Nice. That's how a non-improv podcast does things, folks. Oh, I guess I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you, Spain, for listening to us. We're always in the top 200 of your improv podcasts listened to. Don't know why, but thank you. And Egypt, we're always in the top 100 improv podcasts listened to in Egypt. Also don't know why, but thank you. I appreciate it. Now a few people in America will just get us on the charts. I've only broken 300 once. That's all right. I still appreciate my audience. And now I'll shut up and I'll play the outro. And here we go.